Hey, you lovely lot, and welcome back to Crime Analyst and the Intelligence Cell. Now, I wanted to give you an update in a really important case that I've been tracking, and that's the Idaho 4 quadruple murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Chapin. Now, you'll recall that this case happened on November the 13th, 2022. It's such a horrific case. The students had gone home, back to their home address after a night out, and then they were brutally murdered. And it's a place when you're at home where you should be safe, and they weren't. And this case has just captivated certainly everybody in America, and I believe all across the world. And today, something significant happened, and I wanted to share that with you. And that's that BK was arraigned in court today, so to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. And before I say what happened, I just want to back up a moment and just explain the process, because I know a lot of people are lost in the process of the American legal system. And certainly last week, there was a significant development firstly, and that was that a grand jury had determined to indict BK for the charges of murder of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Chapin, and burglary. And what that basically meant was that the grand jury had met in secret, and that is part of the process. And the prosecution presented their case to a group of peers who heard the evidence, and then they made a determination to indict BK. Now, that's a big deal. And what that basically meant was that the preliminary hearing that was set for June the 26th, that went away. That's when we would have heard the details of the case. And so the indictment means that BK will stand trial. So it doesn't mean to say that he's guilty, but he will stand trial. And we were told last week that he would be arraigned today in court. And that's exactly what happened. So I'm going to tell you about today. He appeared in court, and when the judge asked him to enter his plea, he remained silent. He said nothing. So the judge then entered his not guilty pleas on his behalf. Now, the judge will do that because you're innocent until proven guilty. So those pleas were entered, and that means that we're now ready for trial. And the trial date was set for October the 2nd, 2023, which was staggering to me because I believe that we still have a long way to go, but I'm sure there will probably be some pushback on that date. But I want to go back to the remaining silent. I think a lot of people are flummoxed by that and what that effectively means. And I've spoken to quite a lot of people about this. And the first thing I'll tell you is that it's very unusual. And myself and Jim Clementi and various others were trying to think about other cases where this had happened. It's that unusual where the defendant doesn't enter a plea. Most oftentimes they enter a not guilty plea. They want to have their day in court and argue their case. But that's not what BK chose to do here. So what does that mean effectively? Now, there are some that say it's about him trying to assert control. And maybe it is to do with that he still exerts that modicum of control. But one of the things that I've also been thinking about is that perhaps it's part of the strategy to keep the door open. Sometimes it's better to say nothing and then make a decision, i.e. you keep your powder dry. Now, why would that be a strategy in this case? Well, it might be because at the grand jury, BK and his legal team don't sit there and hear everything that's been presented. They receive a copy of the transcript. Now, the transcript will basically detail, it's almost like a blueprint of the prosecution's case, so the evidence that was put before the grand jury. So they may want to weigh up what that evidence is and then make a decision. But there's another part to this case, and that's that the prosecution has 60 days to seek the death penalty. And I suspect that that's what they're waiting to see. They want to see what comes, and they're keeping their powder dry, and there may well be a guilty plea down the line. Now, I don't know for sure that that will happen, but there have been some mirrors across with the Dennis Rader case. And today I was just looking at what Kerry Rawson Dennis Rader's daughter had been tweeting, because she has spoken out about the case. She did a Dateline, and I was interested to hear her perspective because, like I said, there's been some parallels and mirrors across with Dennis Rader. Now, her father was a prolific serial killer. He has a horrific moniker, which I'm not even going to name here, because what I've learned from working with victims and their families, every time that they hear a graphic and horrific moniker, it conjures up exactly what somebody did to the victims. And that's exactly why this is a self-appointed moniker that he gave himself. He's notorious for what he did. And let me just tell you about what he did in 2005. And that's that he sat in court and he was meant to enter his plea. And he remained silent. Now, what transpired was that he later pleaded guilty to 10 counts of murder, and he also publicly delivered his confession. So there could be a similar direction of travel here. If the death penalty comes in, there could be some plea bargaining, and it is a way of maintaining some control. I say it when I'm ready, and I give my confession when I'm ready, and obviously it leaves the door open to that negotiation. So we'll see what happens. As I said, the trial's set for October the 2nd, 8:30 a.m. It may get pushed back. And the next hearing in the case is June the 9th. And that's where there'll be further discussion to address the gag order and also cameras in court. Now, I do want to say something about the gag order. And this is something that the Goncalves, Kaylee's family and her father Steve feel very strongly about. They want clarity because they want their attorney to be able to speak on behalf of them. And so their attorney is seeking clarity of if he can speak on behalf of the victims. And also there's a media coalition who have joined forces and they're fighting to get more information to the public domain. And they want a less strict gag order. They feel that it's very restrictive. So that will be addressed on June the 9th. And also the cameras in court, that will be addressed on June the 9th. Now, I have mixed views about it because I think in some cases, and I've just been discussing the Menendez case, the brothers, Lyle and Eric, who killed their parents who had been abusing them almost all of their life course. And cameras were allowed in the first trial. And I watched quite a lot of the trial. But at the second trial, the cameras weren't allowed. And there were lots of very concerning decisions that were taken at that trial. And please listen to Real Crime Profile. We've dissected that case. And I can tell you it's really not what you think. It's a case that is wildly misunderstood. And there's a false narrative circulating. And that's why cameras can be very important. But of course, it can become a circus. And the other thing to say is that if you do have a perpetrator who's seeking notoriety and wants to be up there in the hall of the most horrific killers, then I, for one, don't want him to have that. I don't want him to have that platform, and I don't want him to have that publicity. And if that's what he's seeking, which I believe there is an element of that to BK, and I think that's very concerning. We have to think about the fact that his image is circulating all the time. Videos of him are circulating. In fact, the internet is flooded with him. And I really want to correct that, which is why I keep posting about the victims and their families and keep mentioning their names and showing their photos. And I would ask you to join me in that, please, because it's really important that we honor the victims and their families. They're the ones that matter here. And yes, we can take the learning out of the case. And yes, BK has a right to a fair trial, and I do believe that that's important, the right to a fair trial. So that's why the gag order is in place, but it is a very strict one. But the judge will want to ensure that there's no avenue for appeal because BK didn't get a fair trial. So I understand both sides, and it's a very difficult line, but we want to ensure that he gets a fair trial, and I want to ensure all the evidence is heard. I'm very interested to know what all the evidence is. Now, I do know what some of it is, and I have discussed it on previous Crime Analyst YouTube episodes, so please watch those. And there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and that's important to say. And it's not just what BK did. Actually, for me, it's much more significant what he didn't do. And for example, his phone being off across the offending time and his phone pinging multiple times, at least 12, in that area and around that student accommodation address, which isn't a thoroughfare. It's not an area where you would just find yourself. There are lots of things that, in my opinion, are significant, but it needs to be tested in court. And circumstantial, as I've said many times, is as strong and is as important as direct physical evidence. And there is some physical evidence and forensic evidence in this case. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next. And I hope that you join with me in trying to ensure that the victims' photos and their names and their memories are centered in all of this. Please keep watching the videos on the Murdoch murders. It is a very extensive and complicated and complex case, and it does need to be unraveled. And that's what I'm doing here on Crime Analyst. And I really appreciate all of you who've subscribed. Please drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Please click the button. Until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.